On Saturday morning, Margaret was making pancakes in the kitchen while gazing out the window at the quiet suburban residential area that stretched before her. Her home in West Hartford, Connecticut, was typical of a middle-class American household. The small yard, enclosed by a white fence, featured a rose garden that her husband Robert carefully tended, and at this time of year, colorful flowers were blooming magnificently. "Mom, the pancakes smell wonderful." 14-year-old Emily came running down the stairs, tying her bedhead hair back with a rubber band as she sat down at the dining table. She was slender like her mother, with striking large eyes. Since she didn't need to wear her uniform on weekend mornings, she was in her favorite pink pajamas, still showing traces of childhood in her expression. "I put blueberries in them especially for today," Margaret smiled as she served the freshly made pancakes onto her daughter's plate. "Is Dad still sleeping?" "I can hear him taking a shower," Emily replied, pouring maple syrup generously over her pancakes. "Oh, by the way, there's a school dance next Friday. I'm planning to go with my friend Jessica, but I'd love to get a new dress." Margaret listened to her daughter's story while brewing coffee. Emily had recently begun talking more about her friendships and school events, and it was heartwarming to see her gradually growing up. "A dress, Shall we go to the mall together this weekend to look for one?" "Really?" "Yes." Emily's eyes lit up. Jessica's mom said she'd come too, so it would be great if we could all go together. The sound of the front door opening came from the entrance, and Robert, who had gone out to get the newspaper, returned. Her husband worked as a financial analyst at a local investment firm and made it a point to dress neatly even on weekends. Wearing a gray polo shirt and navy chinos, he still maintained a youthful appearance, unchanged from when they married 15 years ago. "Good morning, beautiful ladies," Robert gave his wife a light kiss on the cheek and gently patted his daughter's head. "It's a beautiful day today. Emily, how about playing catch this afternoon?" I have to prepare for a project at Jessica's house today. We need to present it in history class next week," Emily replied, looking a bit apologetic. "I see. It's good that you're so studious," Robert said, taking the coffee Margaret had prepared for him while spreading out the newspaper. "The stock prices are doing reasonably well. This week was busy, but my client's asset management is progressing smoothly." Margaret sat next to her husband, wrapping both hands around her coffee cup. Her part-time job at the library certainly wasn't high-paying, but it helped with household expenses, and more importantly, working in an environment surrounded by books was comfortable for her. It felt like an extension of her college days when she majored in English literature, and the time she spent recommending books to visitors and reading stories to children was fulfilling. "Speaking of which, next month is our wedding anniversary," Margaret said, looking at her husband. "It'll be our 16th year." "That's right. Time flies." Robert looked up from his newspaper and smiled at his wife. "How about we have dinner somewhere special this year? I haven't been able to spend much time with you lately because I've been so busy." When Emily finished her pancakes, the three naturally began talking about their respective plans for the day. Emily had a study session at her friend's house, Robert had a golf appointment in the afternoon, and Margaret planned to tend the garden and prepare dinner. It was an ordinary weekend scene. After the morning passed and Emily left for her friend's house and Robert headed out for golf, Margaret sat in the living room looking through family albums. Wedding photos, pictures from when Emily was born, memories from annual vacations. Every photo showed a happy family. She picked up one photograph she particularly liked. It was a family photo taken on the beach at Cape Cod last summer. All three of them were tanned and had relaxed expressions. Remembering that moment, she recalled how Robert had made jokes that made everyone laugh. Margaret put the photo back in the album and looked out the window. She could see the Johnsons from next door tending their flowers.
Can you imagine making $10,000 a month just from YouTube, all from home? That's exactly what I did with Candlelight Stories. No face, no voice. Check the link in the description if you're curious.
In the garden. They had been married for over 20 years but were still affectionate, and she occasionally saw them walking together. Margaret hoped she and Robert would become a couple like that. When the family gathered in the evening, Margaret had prepared homemade meatloaf. Emily reported that the study session with her friends had been fun, and Robert happily talked about getting a good golf score for the first time in a while. During dinner, the three discussed plans for the coming week and how to spend the weekend. "I have a PTA meeting on Thursday next week," Margaret told Robert. "I also want to consult with the teacher about Emily's grades. I'll try to adjust my schedule so I can come home early," Robert replied. "I'm sorry I haven't been able to spend time with the family lately because the project has been so busy." That night, Margaret lay in bed next to her husband, reflecting on the peaceful day. It wasn't glamorous, but there was stable happiness there. Listening to her husband's breathing as he slept beside her, she fell asleep with a contented feeling. On Monday morning, Margaret arrived at work at the library at 9 o'clock as usual. The West Hartford Public Library was a charming red brick building, and it had already been 7 years since she started working part-time there. The job as a librarian wasn't high-paying, but the quiet environment surrounded by books suited her personality. "Good morning, Margaret," her colleague Dorothy waved from the reception counter. "How was your weekend?" "It was peaceful. I got to spend time relaxing with my family," Margaret smiled as she began organizing returned books. "How about you, Dorothy? Did you get to see your grandchild?" "Yes, he's so adorable I can hardly stand it. But taking care of him all day is exhausting," Dorothy laughed. At 62, she was a good workplace confidant for Margaret. The morning was relatively quiet, and Margaret handled organizing new acquisitions and assisting library users. During lunch break, she ate a sandwich at a nearby cafe as usual while reading a novel she had brought. Recently, she had been reading contemporary literature, particularly drawn to works themed around family. In the afternoon, children who had finished school came to the library. Margaret was in charge of children's story time twice a week, and today was one of those days. She read stories to 6 children gathered in the picture book corner with a gentle voice. Once upon a time, there was a small house deep in the forest. Watching the children's bright eyes, Margaret remembered when her daughter Emily was small. Emily too had been captivated by stories in the same way and looked forward to having books read to her every night before bed. Now she was 14 and read difficult books on her own, but sometimes still showed traces of her younger self. When story time ended, one little girl approached Margaret. "Will you come again next week?" "Of course. What kind of book would be good for next week?" "I want a princess story," the girl replied with shining eyes. Margaret nodded with a smile. Interacting with children was one of the most fulfilling parts of her job. In the evening, before leaving the library, Margaret borrowed several books for herself. A cookbook and a recently popular psychology book. It was a book about family relationships, and she wanted to learn about marital communication and child rearing. When she got home, Emily was sitting at the dining table doing homework. She was seriously working on math problems, pencil in hand, calculating with intense concentration. "Welcome home, Mom. How was the library today?" "It was enjoyable. The children were very pleased with story time," Margaret replied as she put on her apron. "How's your homework coming along?" "Yes, I'm almost finished with math. But I still have a history report left," Emily replied, looking a bit tired. "Next year I'll be in high school, so it'll probably get even harder." Margaret sat next to her daughter. "That's right. But you'll be fine. You always study so diligently." "Mom, I'm thinking about going to college after graduating high school," Emily said, looking at her mother. "But I still can't decide what I want to study." "You still have time. You can think about it slowly," Margaret gently took her daughter's hand. "Dad and I will support you no matter what you choose." Emily showed a relieved expression. "Thank you, Mom. By the way, when is Dad coming home?" Margaret looked at the clock. It was already past 7 in the evening. Robert should normally be home around 6:30. He's late. He must be busy with work. Just then, the sound of the front door opening came. Robert had come home. However, he seemed more tired than usual, and his greeting was brief. "I'm home. It was a long day today." "Welcome home," Margaret greeted her husband. "I'll prepare dinner. Is there anything you'd like to eat?" "Anything is fine." "I'm going to take a shower," Robert said as he went upstairs. Margaret felt something was off. Usually Robert would call out to Emily or talk about the day's events, but today he was quite cold. However, she reconsidered, thinking he was probably just tired from work. During dinner, the three sat around the table, but there was little conversation. Robert checked his cell phone repeatedly and occasionally replied to messages. "Dad, is there some problem at work?" Emily asked worriedly. "No, it's nothing serious. A new project has started and I'm just a bit busy," Robert replied vaguely. After the meal, Robert shut himself in his study to continue working. Margaret was cleaning up in the kitchen while thinking about how her husband's behavior had been strange lately. He had been coming home late more often than before, and even on weekends he frequently checked his cell phone. That night, lying in bed, Margaret spoke to her husband. "Robert, you seem tired lately. Are you all right?" "Yes, I'm fine. I have to work out a complex investment strategy for a new client," Robert replied with his back turned. "Please don't overdo it. If you get sick, it defeats the purpose." "I know. Thank you." However, Robert's voice lacked its usual warmth. Margaret wanted to say something, but since her husband seemed to already be trying to sleep, she said nothing. The next day, Margaret had lunch at the library with her colleague Dorothy and consulted her about her husband. "Robert's been acting a little strange lately. He says work is busy, but he seems different from before." "Marriage has its ups and downs," Dorothy replied in an experienced tone. "I've been with my husband for nearly 40 years, and there were times like that occasionally. It's probably just temporary." "You're probably right," Margaret felt a little relieved. "Next month is our wedding anniversary, so I think I'll try to create time for the two of us to talk quietly." "That's a good idea. How about dinner at a nice restaurant?" Margaret nodded. She decided to plan a special evening to improve her relationship with her husband. On the way home that day, Margaret found a high-end French restaurant in town. Thinking of making a reservation for their anniversary, she entered the restaurant. "I'd like to have dinner for two on the 23rd of next month." "I'm sorry, but that day is already fully booked," the waiter replied politely. "How about the 24th?" Margaret was a little disappointed, but thought the next day would be fine. "Please make it for that day." When she got home, Emily was on the phone with a friend. Bright laughter echoed throughout the house, and Margaret smiled at her daughter's cheerful state. At least among the family, Emily seemed to have no worries. That night, Margaret began reading the psychology book she had borrowed. While reading the chapter about marital relationships, she reflected on their married life. 16 years was a long time, and various things had happened during that period. However, she basically thought it had been a happy marriage. Her husband's recent changes were probably due to work stress. If they had a quiet dinner conversation on their anniversary, they should be able to return to their former relationship. On Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock, Margaret was organizing returned books at the library reception counter. It was a peaceful afternoon, and the library was enveloped in silence. Several elderly people were reading newspapers, and a student-like young person was working at a computer. It was the usual tranquil scene. The telephone rang at that moment. "West Hartford Public Library," Margaret answered, picking up the receiver. "Excuse me. This is Jennifer, a nurse at St. Francis Hospital. Are you a family member of Robert Hamilton?" Margaret was confused for a moment. She was surprised that her husband's name came up, but the fact that it was a call from a hospital made her anxious. "Yes, I'm his wife, Margaret. Has something happened to my husband? No, not your husband. Your son was in a traffic accident and is currently receiving treatment here. Could you please come immediately? Margaret's mind went blank. Son. She didn't have a son. She was supposed to only have her daughter Emily. I'm sorry, but did you say son? I only have a daughter. There was a moment of silence from the nurse on the other end. Could you confirm your name again? Robert Hamilton's name and this phone number are registered as your son's emergency contact. Margaret's heart began beating violently. Was some terrible mistake happening, or a possibility she didn't want to think about crossed her mind? What is your son's name? Her voice was trembling. Michael Hamilton, 10 years old. Margaret felt her hand holding the receiver trembling. The surname Hamilton, and the fact that her husband's cell phone number was registered as an emergency contact. This couldn't be explained as mere coincidence. I understand. I'll be right there. Margaret briefly explained the situation to her colleague Dorothy and told her she was leaving early. Dorothy showed a worried expression, but before she could ask details, Margaret rushed out of the library. While driving, various thoughts swirled in Margaret's mind. A 10-year-old boy. Using her husband's surname and having her husband's phone number as an emergency contact. What could this mean? Did her husband have an illegitimate child? When she arrived at St. Francis Hospital, Margaret was guided by a woman who identified herself as Nurse Jennifer. You're Mrs. Hamilton. Michael is in the pediatric ward. Let me explain the situation of the accident. While walking down the corridor, Jennifer described the details of the accident. Michael had been hit by a car while crossing at a crosswalk on his way home from school. Fortunately, his life wasn't in danger, but he had broken his leg and suffered a mild concussion. We tried to contact his parents, but couldn't reach his father on his cell phone, so we called the home number. Jennifer continued her explanation. His mother is at work and is on her way here. Margaret stopped walking. His mother? Yes, Sarah Parker. Michael's mother. Jennifer stopped mid-sentence. She had noticed Margaret's confused expression. Excuse me, but what is your relationship? I'm Robert Hamilton's wife. Margaret's voice was hoarse. Jennifer's face turned pale. I'm sorry. There seems to be some confusion. At that moment, she could see a woman walking quickly down the corridor from the other end. She was a beautiful woman with long brown hair tied back, wearing a worried expression. When she noticed Margaret's presence, she stopped. Are you Sarah Parker? Jennifer called out. Yes. How is Michael? Sarah replied breathlessly. Then she looked at Margaret with a frown. Who might you be? Margaret took a deep breath. I'm Margaret Hamilton. Robert's wife. The color drained from Sarah's face. The two women stared at each other silently for several seconds. The air in the corridor became heavy, and Jennifer stood there looking confused. First, let's have you see Michael, Jennifer suggested, trying to smooth over the situation. Entering the hospital room, they could see a boy lying in a small bed. Michael seemed to be sleeping, but the moment she saw his sleeping face, Margaret felt like she couldn't breathe. The child unmistakably bore Robert's features. The same shaped nose, the same color hair, and above all, an expression similar to Emily's when she was young. Michael, Sarah rushed to her son's bedside and gently took his hand. It's Mommy. Are you okay? Michael slowly opened his eyes. Mommy, my leg hurts. I know. The doctor will make it better, Sarah said, tears welling up as she stroked her son's head. Margaret stood in the corner of the room, watching this scene. It didn't feel real. She thought this might be a bad dream. Who's that lady? Michael noticed Margaret and asked. Sarah looked at Margaret with a troubled expression. This person is. I'm Margaret, Margaret answered in a gentle voice. You had a hard day today. But you're okay now. Michael smiled weakly. Thank you. At that moment, the hospital room door burst open. Robert came in breathlessly. He first rushed to Michael's bed, then looked at Sarah, and finally noticed Margaret's presence. Robert's face turned pale blue. Margaret, why are you? The hospital called. Margaret's voice was quiet, but deep sadness was embedded in it. They said your son had been in an accident. The air in the hospital room froze. Robert stood there speechless. Sarah gripped her son's hand while staring at the floor. Daddy, Michael looked up at Robert. It hurts. It's okay, Michael. Daddy's here. Robert kissed his son's forehead. Margaret watched this scene and understood everything. Her husband had a 10-year-old son. With another woman. And he had never told her about this fact. Let's talk, Margaret said quietly. But right now, Michael's treatment is the top priority. A doctor entered the room and began explaining Michael's condition. The fracture wasn't complicated and should heal in a few weeks. The concussion was also mild, and he might be able to go home tomorrow after overnight observation. When the explanation ended, Margaret called Robert and Sarah out of the room. In the corridor lounge, the three sat facing each other. 10 years, Sarah spoke first. I've been with Robert for 10 years. Even after Michael was born, all this time. Margaret stared at her husband. Is it true? Robert covered his face with both hands. Margaret, I'm sorry. Let me explain. 10 years, Margaret repeated. Since Emily was 4 years old. Since when I thought we were still a happy family. I didn't mean for this to happen. At first it was a work relationship. Sarah was a client of the investment consulting company. But then. I don't want excuses, Margaret raised her hand. Right now I just want to know the facts. Sarah began speaking through tears. I knew he was married to you. But he said he was planning to get divorced. Divorce? Margaret looked at her husband. Were you thinking about divorcing me? Robert couldn't answer. Silence dominated the lounge. Margaret stood up. Tonight, please stay by Michael's side. I'm going home. I have to explain to Emily. Margaret, wait, Robert tried to stand up. I don't want to talk right now, Margaret said without turning around. Tomorrow, when I've calmed down, we'll talk. When leaving the hospital, Margaret looked into the room once more. Michael was sleeping embraced by Sarah. Robert was standing by the window, staring outside. In the car, Margaret pressed her head against the steering wheel and cried. 16 years of married life had crumbled in an instant. However, strangely, she didn't feel anger toward that little boy. Michael wasn't at fault. He too was a victim of this complicated situation. The next morning, Margaret woke up after not sleeping at all. She had explained to Emily that a family friend had been in an accident at the hospital and sent her off to school. She judged it was still too early to tell her daughter the truth. At 10 in the morning, Sarah called from the hospital. Margaret, would you like to talk? Michael was safely discharged this morning. We're at a nearby cafe. If it's all right with you. Sarah's voice was calmer than yesterday, but fatigue and tension were apparent. Margaret hesitated a little, but felt she needed to know the truth. I understand. Which cafe? 30 minutes later, Margaret entered a small cafe near the hospital. Sarah was sitting at a window seat, with Michael next to her, his cast-covered leg resting on a chair. The boy looked more energetic than yesterday and was drawing with colored pencils. Good morning, Margaret greeted quietly. Margaret, thank you for yesterday. Sarah tried to stand up, but Margaret gestured for her to remain seated. Please stay seated. Michael, how are you feeling? Lady, my leg hurts but I'm okay, Michael showed a friendly smile. Look, I drew a picture of Daddy's company. Margaret looked at the picture the boy had drawn. A tall building and the words, Daddy's work, written in childish letters. That's very good, Margaret smiled gently. You know a lot about Daddy's work. Yes. Sometimes Daddy takes me to his company. But he says it's a secret. Sarah looked at her son with panic. Michael, could you play outside for a bit? In the park in front of the cafe. My leg hurts. It's okay. Just for a little while. Michael obeyed his mother's words and went outside with his crutches. From the cafe window, they could see the boy sitting on a park bench. Let's talk, Sarah took a deep breath and began. First, I want to apologize. I never intended to hurt you. How long have you known about my existence? From the beginning, Sarah's voice became small. When I met Robert, he didn't hide the fact that he was married. But he said his marriage had grown cold and he was planning to divorce soon. Margaret gave a bitter smile. Grown cold. We were happy. At least I thought we were. For the first few months, I thought it was really just a temporary relationship. But as time passed, Sarah wiped away tears. He was very good at leading a double life. Please tell me specifically. What kind of relationship was it? Sarah took a deep breath. He came to my apartment every Thursday night and Sunday afternoon. Sometimes we'd spend weekends together, saying it was a business trip. When Michael was born, he was at the hospital too. Margaret traced through her memories. Thursday night overtime, Sunday golf, monthly business trips. Everything fit together. Michael knows he's his father. Yes. But he doesn't understand the complicated circumstances. He just has a vague sense that Daddy has another family too. Margaret looked at Michael outside the window. His innocent attempt to feed pigeons reminded her of Emily when she was young. Have you ever pressured him to divorce? Many times, pain seeped into Sarah's voice. Especially after Michael was born. But he always said, wait a little longer, or, I'm waiting for the right time. Last spring, I finally brought up breaking up. And then, he cried and apologized. He promised he would really get divorced this time and wanted to be with us officially. And he said he would tell you everything soon. Margaret felt bitter. Last spring was when Robert had been particularly kind. On their anniversary he had given her an expensive necklace and had even planned a family trip. Financial support. $3,000 a month, Sarah answered honestly. Plus Michael's medical expenses and educational costs. I work too, but on a nurse's salary alone. $3,000 a month. Margaret thought about the household finances. She had indeed felt that the amount Robert contributed to household expenses had become less than before recently. He had explained that his investments weren't doing well, but in reality he had been supporting another family. Does Michael know anything about me? Just your name. He knows Daddy has a wife named Margaret. But I haven't told him the details. At that moment, Michael returned to the cafe. Mommy, the pigeons ate the bread. That's wonderful, Sarah patted her son's head. Lady, Michael turned toward Margaret. What are the people in Daddy's other family like? Sarah tried to stop her son in panic, but Margaret answered calmly. There's a girl named Emily. She's a bit older than you and a very kind child. I have a big sister. I'd like to meet her. Michael, Sarah warned in a troubled voice. Maybe you can meet her someday, Margaret smiled at the boy. That afternoon, Margaret went home alone and waited for Robert to return. Emily was planning to stay overnight at a friend's house, so they could talk quietly together. At 7 in the evening, Robert came home with heavy footsteps. His face was exhausted, and he looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. Welcome home, Margaret greeted him calmly. Margaret. Robert stood frozen in front of his wife. Let's sit down. We have a lot to talk about. Sitting facing each other in the living room, Robert began speaking as if he had given up. I met Sarah 10 years ago. Her father was my client, and she came for investment consultation. At first it really was just a work relationship. How did that change? She had been hurt by her fiancé's betrayal at the time. While I was giving her advice, Robert was at a loss for words. It's nothing but an excuse, but I was feeling that my relationship with you had become routine. Routine? Margaret's voice rose. We told each other, I love you, every day. That's true. But I wanted stimulation. Something fresh. So you continued a double life for 10 years. Robert hung his head. When Michael was born, I was really in trouble. I couldn't abandon him. But I couldn't imagine losing you and Emily either. So you chose both. It was cowardly. I didn't want to hurt either of you, but I ended up hurting everyone. Margaret stood up. Tomorrow, I'll tell Emily everything. She has the right to know. Margaret, please. Let's start over. I'll break up with Sarah. I'll continue paying child support for Michael, but you and our family are most important. Now. Margaret turned around. How can I trust someone who lied for 10 years? Robert couldn't say anything. Heavy silence flowed between them. Please sleep in another room tonight, Margaret said quietly. Tomorrow, I'll consult with a lawyer. Going upstairs, Margaret felt strange. Rather than anger, she felt something like liberation. 3 months later, Margaret was brewing coffee in the kitchen of her new apartment. The divorce proceedings had gone more smoothly than expected, and a new life with Emily had begun. Her daughter had initially been confused and showed anger toward her father, but gradually came to accept the situation. Mom, what time is Michael coming? Emily called from the living room. Around 2 o'clock. Sarah will come with him. This strange relationship had begun a month ago. When Michael was slightly injured again, Sarah had contacted her. Her son kept saying he wanted to see Aunt Margaret. The first meeting had been tense, but Michael's pure smile and Emily's kindness had eased the complicated situation. Emily not only accepted the existence of her half-brother but also showed the caring nature expected of an older sister. Oh, they're here, Emily said, looking out the window. The doorbell rang, and when Margaret opened the door, Michael stood there happily with his crutches. Aunt Margaret. Hello, Michael. How is your leg? It's much better. The doctor says I can get rid of the crutches next week. Sarah also greeted them modestly. Thank you for having us. We always appreciate this. You're welcome. Emily was looking forward to it too. In the living room, Emily was helping Michael with his math homework. Their relationship was natural, like blood siblings. Emily, big sister, I don't understand this. You do it like this, and then like this. Do you understand? Margaret and Sarah were having a quiet conversation in the kitchen. Emily is really kind, Sarah said with gratitude. Michael talks about big sister Emily all the time at home. You've done well raising Michael by yourself, Margaret said sincerely. He's grown into a fine child. Thank you, tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. Actually, I've decided something. I'm going to completely settle my relationship with Robert. Margaret was surprised. About child support. That too. I've decided to stop relying on him. I can raise Michael by myself. I found a better job using my nursing qualifications. That must be difficult. But I want to live by my own strength. Watching you gave me courage. Margaret smiled. She herself had changed her library job to full-time and achieved financial independence. At that moment, laughter could be heard from the living room. Emily and Michael seemed to be enjoying a board game. We're like real siblings, Michael said innocently. Yes, we are. But we might be more special than real siblings, Emily answered. We chose to become family. Hearing those words, Margaret and Sarah looked at each other. In the evening, when Sarah and Michael were leaving, Michael handed Margaret a letter. I wrote this. Please read it. The letter was written in childish handwriting, to Aunt Margaret. Thank you for always being kind to me. You and big sister Emily are my precious family. Thank you, Michael. We think of you as precious too. That night, Emily and Margaret sat on the sofa together, drinking tea. Mom, our family has become bigger than ever before, Emily said quietly. That's right. The form has changed, but the love might have become bigger. I can't forgive Dad, but Michael isn't at fault. I'm proud that you think that way. Margaret looked out the window. She could see the beautiful sunset. It was a situation she couldn't have imagined 3 months ago, but strangely she felt peaceful. Family isn't determined only by blood relations. As long as there are hearts that care for and support each other, any form can become family, Margaret was convinced. Emily and Michael, and Sarah. Their new relationship was giving her something far more valuable than what she had lost. Truth sometimes brings pain, but by accepting it, deeper love and understanding can be born. Margaret smiled quietly, holding hope for the future of her new family.